Go ahead, Gopi.
ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. I'm Gopi K, your host for today. On behalf of VHS Karnataka, very warm welcome to all the wonderful viewers for the 44th edition of Online Samvada, brought to you by VHS Karnataka. We had 43 amazing episodes of Samvada from VHS Karnataka until now, including last Friday's enlightening session on Halal Certificate, Economic Jihad by Shri Ramesh Shindeji. What a detailed well-researched session was that. Bharatiya Itihasa recorded many thousands of years of thriving civilization in Akhanda Bharata. Vedas, Puranas, Upanishads, and thousands of ancient scriptures give us undeniable Bharatiya Itihasa with enough of evidence, including the most advanced celestial references, which our ancestors were pioneers thousands of years before the modern astronomy. If we take up the last 2000 years of timeline period, for about 1700 years, Bharata was the richest civilization Rashtra, or a country, with thriving economy, culture, technology, maths, arts, architecture, education, so on and so forth. The decline of Bharata had started ever since the Islamic invasion plundered our architecture and marvelous divine devasthanams, temple towns, universities, knowledge systems, looted Bharat for many centuries. Our ancestors worked even harder to save our Bharatiya civilization to cover the loot and plunder of these invaders. One more evil force has sneaked into Bharat in the name of business. They colonized Bharat, looted completely in today's wealth worth more than $45 trillion, and made people in Bharat poorer, and also made Bharat poor nation or a poor Rashtra, except some soldiers of outsiders. Initially, it was Islamic invaders plundered and looted Bharatiya. Later, the church group colonizers looted wealth, technology, artifacts, and third evil invaders on Bharat were the Marxist Leninist communists who attacked our culture, values, traditions, our scriptures, ithihasas. It is Sanatana Dharma which held together Akhanda Bharata for thousands of years, not just the unification of princely states. All the three Abrahamic invaders have one ulterior motive against Bharat to distort Bharatiya Itihasa, destabilize, loot, plunder, and destroy Bharat. To talk about this, we have a special guest speaker, Shri K. Dasapathi Rao, Rao Garu, Deputy Education Officer, retired. Namaskaram, Dasapathi Rao Garu ji. Dasapati ji, namaste. And Shri
Namaskar.
Dasapati Rao Garu did his MA, MA, worked as a lecturer in DIET and government IASC, state president for Shiksha Samskrita Uttanyas, Andhra Pradesh, textbook rewrite for DEd and high school level in AP, and SC, what he calls SCERT. We are also joined by VHS State Karnataka State President Shri Nikunsha ji, Shri Tejas, Shri Sujindra Kumar. I think he has some technical issues in getting logging in, so we will try to find him up sooner. Without any further ado, now I request Sri Dasapati Rao Garu to enlighten us on all of this. What, how, where all did they distort Bharata Itihasa? Floor is yours, sir. Thank you, sir.
So, thanks to Shri Gopi Garu and the organizers of VHS. And today, so we shall let us take upon some of the distortions that have taken in Indian history. So, first of all, so those who control the past, so they will also control the future. So that's why the nation that is not proud of its ancestors, so is doomed to go down. So that's why So we have to have a right perspective, a correct perspective of our past. Then we can draw conclusions, and we can draw inspiration from the failures and as far as our successes. So that's why if our past is properly presented, so maybe their successes have to be properly presented as successes, and failures have to be presented as failures. So that's why both a nation can learn and should learn both from the successes and its failures. So that's why, so we have to have a right perspective of the history. So now let us look at this from the Indian perspective, and how what happened, how our history is presented, and how our history was written. That is the real thing that you have to look to. So here there are some great men who had lived and died for this country, and they had also studied history, and they had their own presentation. Say, for example, the greatest monk of the modern times, Swami Vivekananda, how he had how he had said about the Indian history. I'll just love to read about what he had said. So the when the real history of India will be unearthed, so it will be proud that it's a matter of it's in as in the matter of religion, so in fine arts, India is the prime guru of the whole world. So history itself bears testimony to the fact that the soul elevating ideas of the different branches. So that's why know your past. Out of the past is built the future. Look back, therefore, as far as you can. Drink deep into the eternal fountains that are behind and after that. Look forward, march forward, and make India brighter, greater, and much higher than she ever was. This is what Swami Vivekananda said. So Swami Vivekananda again says, whenever I look back to if you want to make the country great, so let our children go as deep as possible, as far as possible in history, and then you will be a right soldier for the future of this nation. So that's why here in this is what Swamiji had said. So now he had also the idea of how the history was being presented at that time. So now we can see that as far as the presentation of Indian history or the writing of the Indian history is concerned, there are mainly the two streams. So one is that of the Britishers, how they had written our history, and the next one is that of the Marxist or the leftist group that had the control of the Indian history or writing of the Indian history. So then, first of all, let us understand why did they do so. So the Britishers, so when they had come to this nation, the early people when they came to this country, so William Jones and other peoples when they studied Sanskrit, and through that when they studied the Indian history and all that, the things of Indian history, philosophy, and other things, they were astonished, and they felt that the Indian culture and the Indian people and the Indian civilization, and they were far more superior than the English and even the Western people. So that's why, so they had a great passion, they had a great love for this culture and all that. So then the things have not gone as it had to. So then, when a group of the Britishers or the persons of the East India Company, they felt that if the and if the Indians become aware of their greatness and aware of their culture and aware of their achievements of the achievement in the past, and we cannot permanently keep them under our control. We cannot permanently rule this country. So they wanted to control our education. They wanted to control our minds, and they wanted to establish the later, the Britishers or the historians or the people, the missionaries put the people that have come later, they began to feel that if these things will go, then someday we have to leave this country, and we cannot have permanently control over this nation. Then they had some. Then they began to then they began to present the Indian history, write the Indian history in some other way. Then in the later part of the East India Company, and they had joined with the missionaries, and they began to depict Indian history in a very dark manner, and they began to distort it. So the same was continued by the Marxists after the British had left. So now let us how they had done it, and the main intention of the British was that they have to physically conquer this country. They had control over this country, and then if their conquer, if their conquest, if their conquest had to be everlasting, if their conquest had to be permanent, so they have to see that the Indians do not take pride in their culture. They should not take pride in their great men. They should not take pride in their achievements and all that. So then they began to they began to distort our culture, and the great achievements and their great philosophy and their great this art, architecture, and our achievements in different fields of that. So then now, and the later part and that was later continued by the Marxist and the left-oriented historians. So now, the intention of the British in distorting the Indian history was the conquest of the Indian mind, and to make the Indians feel that they were inferior, to make the Indians feel that the white people were superior than theirs. They wanted to make them feel that their religion was superior. They wanted to make them feel that they were the only people that they can be rational and scientific. They wanted to prove that their art and architecture were greater than Indians. They wanted to prove that their language was mm, far superior than us. So, for this, they wanted to depict everything Indian in a very negative and in an inferior ways, that they wanted to do that. So that was the intention of the Britishers in distorting the Indian history was to prove that Indians were inferior to the Westerners or the Britishers in each and every aspect of life, in each and everything of that life. That was their intention, that they wanted to conquer their Indian minds. So that was clearly mentioned by Macaulay. He said, we want the interpreters here. So we want people who are who are black in color, and whose tastes and whose opinions, whose interests will be of the West. So that's why they began to depict the Indian culture in a dark manner, and they wanted to present everything West as superior to theirs. So that was the intention of the British in distorting the Indian history. So the second one is the Marxist. So to speak the fact, so the Marxists are also Marxist ideology has also come from the West. So the Marxists also what was the main intention in distorting the Indian history by the Marxists? So the main intention of the Marxists was, so if they have to accept the foreign ideology, that is the Marxist way of life, or the communist way of life. So what they wanted to do was that, so first the nationalist mindset or the pride of the people has to be destroyed in their culture and in this. And then in that place they can imbibe the Western thought. It is also a something kind of that. Just as the Christian missionaries do, what is their process of proselytization? First they first what they do is that first they depict a negative picture of our religion. Then in that place they keep their religion. So also the Marxists wanted to, as far as the nationalist ideology is strong, as far as the national pride is there with the people, they would never accept the communism, they would never accept the Marxist thought. So for them, the first thing is to destroy the nationalist views, nationalist narrative, or the nationalist feeling, the nationalist thoughts. So in that place, in that vacuum, they wanted to put in the Marxist thought and all that. So that's why the nationalist feeling and the pride of this nation is to be first destroyed, and in that place they wanted to keep that Marxist thought. So now here, no, let us go to this. This first, the thing is that they wanted the first one is the Aryan invasion theory. So when the Indians began to feel uh, great about their ancestry, the Vedas and all that, so then the Sanskrit language also is a very great language. So then they began to say, when their language and all these things, they began to feel proud of that. Then what they began to think is that the people of who preached the Sanskrit, so they were Aryans. They had come from outside. So then they began to say, then after that, the Muslims had come from outside, and after that, and we had also come here. But everybody here, so this culture which you are proud of is not your own. The culture you feel great, like your Vedas, and they were not of the people of this land, they were from the people of the other lands first. So that's why they came earlier first and we came later. So that's why everything great you depict in this country is that has come from outside. That was the very basic intention that they wanted to prove. And for that, the Aryan invasion theory was then this Aryan invasion theory was invented rather by this. So we need not go deep into this Aryan invasion theory. And the basic intention behind this Aryan invasion theory is to prove that there is only the Dravidians were the natives of this land, and everything this Indian culture you feel proud of is also foreign. So that's why now it is the white man's burden again to make this nation, make you people civilized, and that was their intention in doing that. So then this, after this Aryan theory has led to the Aryan Dravidian this theory. So they began to say that the northern people are Aryans and the southern are Dravidians, and the Brahmins are Aryans and all other the downtrodden sections are Dravidians. This has gone so deep into the people. This was propagated, and it has later it laid the seeds of separatism. It laid the seeds of then the division in the Indian society. So see, some of the great thinkers of India who loved this country, Dr. Ambedkar said this is all nonsense. When the Brahmins of Tamil Nadu are Aryans, the downtrodden people are also Aryans. How can it be that that was what Ambedkar has argued? And later, when Sri Aurobindo had also said, and before that, I used to think that these people, the people in Tamil Nadu were Dravidians. When I came here, when I began to I mixed the people, and it's all nonsense that he said it. So that's why that is the way that they wanted to destroy this. So then another thing that they had done was they misinterpret the Vedas. So they had taken certain slokas and they misinterpreted it, the slokas, because, and then they began to say that it was there in the audience, but it was not. It was a total misinterpretation of the Vedas. So then later, so then regarding the dates, their distortion also had taken place regarding the chronology also. So regarding the chronology, they wanted to fit the Indian chronology as per the biblical notions. So as per the Bible, so they say that the earth was created on 23rd February 4004 BC. So as per that, they began to condense the Indian chronology as per that. So that's why the fixing of the Indus civilization, and then the Vedic period, and the later periods were also began to condense as per their biblical notions. Maybe it was Max Muller or the many other historians. So and later, so their distortion also had another, the ancient period was this in the writing of the Indian textbooks. So they see the glorious period. So and it was divided into three periods, that of the more thousands of years of history up to the Islamic invasion. Oh, and the later the Islamic period, and the later the modern period, and all this. So the greater space has to be given to the thousands of years of glorious Indian history, where our mathematics, our science and technology, and in all other spheres, in art, architecture, language, literature, and everything had flourished. So that has to be given more space. But unfortunately, and the things were depicted in a negative picture and in a darker way, and also less space is given to uh, that period, and where we feel proud of our achievements and proud of our greatness. So these two things are taking giving less space to it, and also at the same time, so they had to side. What did they do? Both the Marxists and the British also had done. So the entire Indian culture, the from Vedas to the from Vedic culture and all these things, it was casteist, it was Brahminical, it was against women, it was against the lower classes. So these were nothing to be proud of. So that was what they began to depict, and all that. That was also known to us. So then they began to pit Buddhism and Jainism against Hinduism. So actually, to speak the fact, Buddhism is a reformist movement in Hinduism. So as Swami Vivekananda says, Buddhism is the what Swamiji says is that uh, Buddhism is the rebel child of Hinduism. That is what he says. So that's why its roots is in Hinduism, not everything. But in this way, they began to, even the British and in the Marxists also had done the same. So the missionaries also had joined that. So what was the intention of the missionaries? So missionaries, they know that Indian culture is far superior than Christianity. And far superior, there were examples of some of the sincere Christian missionaries also. One Christian missionary, he came to, so I think I felt something like in Germany or something like that, he came to India. So then he went to some Brahmin, he said that I want to know something about your culture. Then he had given our whole literature and all that. When he studied all this, we sincerely studied and all that, then he said, no, there is no meaning in preaching Christianity here. So then he asked, why do you think so? He said, there are hundreds and thousands of Christs in this country. So then why there is a need to preach Christ here? So then, with a great feeling that the Indian culture and in the greater, so many great people were born in this country, and that was the way that he had done it. So the Christian missionaries want to depict everything Indian. So in a negative manner. For that, they say Indians are enemies. Indian culture is superstitious. They are idol worshippers. They worship the trees. They worship the stones, idols, and all that idol worships, that they begin to depict us in so many negative ways. So that's why the missionary network and all the other people also began to do all these kinds of mischief with the Indian history. And the Max Muller, the East India Company had invested a lot of money, and given to Max Muller and to Vedas, to interpret the Vedas. So Max Muller had successfully done it by inventing this Aryan invasion theory also. So that's why this Aryan invasion. So then the Aryan, then there are so many other things that the Aryan is not a race. So there is no proof in entire Indian literature to say that they have come from Aryans, they come from outside. So even all these evidences are were quite evident. So that's why to speak the fact, the Marxist people are the propagators of an ideology. They are not seekers of truth. So they are the propagators of an ideology, and they distort uh, anything and everything just to prove their line of thinking. So that's why they began to Indian history. They began to interpret Indian history in economic terms, everything in economic terms. So that's quite evident from the Marxist school of thought. So now that's why there is another thing is that then that was the case with this. There's one another great thing. The Indian that distorted the Indian culture was that of the continuity of Indian culture. So many great historians great accept that Indian culture is a continuity of the continuity is there in the Indian culture. So that's why the all the ancient cultures like the Egyptian culture, the Rome, the Babylonian, and the Persian, they were extinct. We don't find that culture there. They were all converted to Christianity, either Christian or the Islam. The only living culture in the world is the Indian culture. So that also was distorted by successfully distorted by the Britishers as well as the Marxist historians. There is nothing like the continuity of Indian culture, and they also began to say that India is never a nation. So they began to depict the a nationhood based on language and all other things. So then that is the way that they had distorted the our ancient period. And then again this comes in, the distortion also comes in the thing, the Islamic period. So the Islamic period, and the mostly the Marxist historians, they wanted to whitewash the Islamic invader, the atrocities committed by the Islamic invaders. So they began to interpret the destruction of the temples, then the conversions, and also the way they harassed, or the way they harassed the Hindus by imposing the taxes, and by all means they attribute it to the economic factors. So then they say the Somnath temple was destroyed for money, and all other because the temples had a large amounts of money, and they were looted. Then they don't have an explanation to say how did they uh, how did they destroy the idols, and how did they took them and kept in their steps, and to insult the people, to insult the culture. So what is the basic intention behind the invasion, Islamic invasions? So to Islamize the whole world. in their intention, the all others are kafirs. So though they want to destroy idols, destroy their culture, they convert by hook or crook. So that's why that was their basic intention. So that basic intention was clearly uh, that was not clearly depicted by the Marxist historians, and they had tried to whitewash the Islamic uh, atrocities and their Islamic atrocities committed by the Islamic invaders. So that was uh, what they had done it. And then the even in the later periods of the even the British, after the independence period, then the modern period was also the Indian modern Indian history, or the Indian after the Indian movement, Indian national movement was also depicted in a just a stream of Gandhian era, and the Indian National Congress. So that's why the role played by Indian National Army by Subhash Chandra Bose, and also the great revolutionaries like Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad, and it was quite missing. And this the other streams, so that had contributed for the independence of India in the Indian national movement, so they were sidelined, or they were minimized, or they were properly or not properly depicted in the NCERT textbooks written by the Marxist historians. They depicted Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad, and all the Indian nationalist revolutionaries as terrorists. So then, how does it go to the Indian youth when they study this kind of history? So this is how they had done it. So that's why they had a maximum, mostly after the from 1970 onwards, from 1970 for about 40 years. So the Marxist historians they had a monopoly on the writing Indian history. So mostly the Aligarh Muslim University, the Jawaharlal University, Delhi University, and of them were full of these Marxist historians, and they had a control over the Indian IHR, ICHR, Indian Council of Historical Research. They were the people who were funding the history. So they were not allowing people uh, who do not toe their line. They were not funding. They were not allowing them to come up. They were not allowing their voice to come up. They were not allowing their publications to come up. So that's why, if at all anybody had to do that, so they had to do on their at their individual level, and they had absolutely no support. They had a network of people who toe their lines, and they did not allow any other interpretation of the Indian history. So now, during the Indian independence movement, so some of the people who are very much hurt by the way the Britishers began to interpret the Indian culture, they wanted to take up the Indian history writing. So that there were R.C. Mazumdar, Jadnath Sarkar, and the other historians. They began to go into their past, and they began to see the what was the reality. They wanted to seek the truth. They wanted to see what real history was. So then they had taken up in a very scientific manner, and in a very professional manner, and they began to they wrote a very good this uh, in a very rightful manner. They began to interpret this a nationalist approach was taken up by these great historians like the R.C. Mazumdar and Jadunath Sarkar and others on the nationalist lines. So when the Marxists came to the limelight from 1970 till the recent times, so then they began to undermine them. They did not allow any other interpretation of history, and they targeted this nationalist views of this history and all that. They simply began to they began to simply began to uh, just target these people, and they did not allow any other view or any other interpretation, any other stream of interpretation. They did not come up, they did not materialize. They were the terror, they were a kind of intellectual terrorists, and they had their period for quite a long time, for about 40 years in this period. So to know their real intentions, that we can see how K.K. Muhammad, who retired as the joint director of Archaeological Survey of India, he said during the Ayodhya movement, so some sections of Muslims began to think that Ayodhya was a place of very much importance to the Hindus. So if we just as a goodwill gesture, if we allow them to have their own land, they were thinking on those lines. Then these Marxist historians, K.K. Muhammad says that they were thinking on those lines, some of the Muslims. Then the Marxist historians like the Romila Thapar and Satish Chandra, Irfan Habib, and all these people had come, and they began to tell the Muslim sections that you have a strong ground to prove that it was not the Hindu structure. So it was a Buddhist structure before, and they did not allow them to compromise, and they did not allow them to think on the right lines. That was K.K. Muhammad, who said um, that how the Marxists had played a role, and they had towed the lines of the Babri Masjid Action Committee, and they were never seekers of truth. They were the propagators of an ideology. They will go to any extent. They will go to any extent to distort things, to distort things, to tow their ideology. To tow their ideology, they were never seekers of truth. They were only propagators of an ideology. So that is what we have to understand that. So in their interpretation of history, so their selection of the sources for writing the history, and it was all a kind of and that was what the Marxist historians had done it. So that's why now what this is the way how both the British and the Marxist historians had done this for the even for the NCERT textbooks. So one professor Neeraj Atre, when he had, through RTI, he had asked the NCERT textbooks, to prove some of the things that was written quite about the Vedas and all that. Now, then asked for through RTI what was the basis for all this, what are the sources for all that. NTRT said that they had no sources. So in this way, so the Indian this history was both a victim of both the Britishers and also the Marxist historians. So that now the present, even at the present times, so the Marxists have had lost their ground. So there was no second generation of historians that could compete with the all these the present uh, trends. So now they had shifted their ground to the west. So then here the Wendy Doniger and all they began to the anti-Hindu historical group of the thinkers of the West and the Indian left nexus are now working hand in glove with uh, these people. And now, to speak the fact, they had shifted their ground to the West. So the Indian leftists are working with the anti-Hindu intellectuals of the West, and now now they are doing the mischief from outside the country. So that is being done. And even in West Bengal, when the so-called the progressives, the Marxist CPM government was there in 1989, they had issued a circular. He said from the historical textbooks. So how the things have to be, uh, how the things have to be corrected. So that's even that they had given a long list of the things that should not be that should not come into the textbooks, like that of the Islamic atrocities committed by the Islamists and all that in 1989. They had the West Bengal government also had given that the textbooks are that is they wanted to purify it as per their intentions. So when this even Nurul Hassan, when the Indira Gandhi in 1967 when she became the prime minister, so then she had taken the support of the communists. So then the communists had asked for the Department of Education and Culture. So then they JNU was established, and then when slowly that the education department, the history had gone into them, the that is the way. Then the whole of uh, this Indian history had been uh, depicted, and the Indian history had gone a lot of distortions from in the hands of both in the hands of both the Britishers and also the Marxists. So that was the NCRT, and also is a great mischief even today. But we read this when we go through these textbooks, we can see how what a great mischief that these people had done this, and this needs to be a correction of all these things have to be corrected. So we have to take up all these people at the intellectual level. So the younger generation or the young people have to come up and you take up history in a professional manner. So just slogan mongering will not do. So what we have to do is that we should be professional. So we should spend years to go deep into what was there and to face them at the intellectual level, and to all these things had again to be rewritten. History has to be rewritten, and our glorious interesting history has to be promoted. So the thing that they had to do is that they had done was that of all the Indian achievements during the our past, mostly in the kind of science and technology, and in mathematics, and in metallurgy, and in yoga and all that. Now the whole world began to slowly come to the Indian land. When Swami Vivekananda went to America, and he said he had to face was how the Christian missionaries had given a very dark picture of a dismal picture of the Indians. When he was asked, when he had gone to the West, so he had to face so many questions there. So people began to ask, so do the Indian women throw their children to the crocodiles? Swami Vivekananda has to. So one question Swami Vivekananda was asked was, do Indians treat women as equals to men. So there was a question for Swami Vivekananda. Then he said no. Then everybody was spellbound. Then he said, no, what I see is, and women in India are far more greater than men. That was what he said. And everybody had clapped then. So that's why in India, in the glorious picture, the real picture of India was taken in the modern times to the West was Swami Vivekananda. So then again he had said that Indian history has to be written by Indians. So the people who had misinterpreted Indian history to some extent by Max Muller, even the Marx, and all those people, they had never, Max Weber, and they had never visited India, and they had sat in their own these rooms, and they had written history of Indian history, and with their ulterior motives, with their bad intentions, with their then and that's so. It's our bounden duty now today to see that the younger generations are presented the right picture of our Indian history. So the more we go back into our past, the more inspiration we will get. The more we look back, the more we go deep into our history, and then we'll be more proud of our achievements. So then we'll also be able to understand why uh, we were defeated for their disunity and for their this. We'll also understand. We'll correct our mistakes. History gives us great lessons for us and to make our country great. So we have to have the control over our own history. So as Swami Vivekananda said, so we have to write our own history. But one thing we should remember is that the guidelines, the way we to write history, certain things that we can take from the British or from the West, but Indians alone should write Indian history. So Indians alone, the people with the Indian background alone can understand the Indian ethos or the Indian great scriptures, and then all we can only understand. So if we look at the Indian scriptures from the Western mind, so there is every possibility that it can be misunderstood, it can be misinterpreted, or they will not be able to properly understood in the right perspective. So that's why the bounden duty before us is a professionalism or the professional way of uh, looking at history, the professional way of studying history, the professional way of interpretation of history in the Indian perspective, and that we have to uh, do that. Though it's our bounden duty to see that the right perspective of Indian history is presented and to the Indian this. So the right perspective and the truth has to be brought forth. So lastly, I will read out what Sri Aurobindo said about how what we have to do regarding the Indian history. So this says, the Sri Aurobindo says, a time must come when Indian mind will shake off the darkness that has fallen upon it and reassert its right to judge and inquire into the meaning of its own scriptures. When that day comes, we shall question many established philological myths. For instance, of an Aryan invasion of India from uh, from the from the artificial and the inimical distinction of the Aryan and the Dravidian, which an Iranian philosophy has driven like a wedge into the unity of homogeneous uh, Indian people. So that's why we have to shake off the mist that has drawn upon the Indian mind, and we have to see that the right things, the truth comes out, and it is the bounden duty of every Indian youngster to take up history and go deep into it and see that the truth comes out, and the inspiration that we get from the past makes India a great, once again, a very great country than it was. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Dasapathi Rao Garu. Thank you a lot for your enlightening and distortion of the Bharati Itihasa. I think is Sudhinda there, Tejas?
His camera is
Sudhinda
off.
ji, are you there? Okay. If you have any question, like we can quickly ask it and wind it off, please.
He's on mute.
Okay. All right. I think. Thank you, sir. I think let's hope our histories have been rewritten to true history, and all the textbooks are rewritten to the true history rather than taking from the colonial era or the Marxist lies, which is being, I mean, told to their tones. Let's hope like the current system can clean that up and put the real true history. And we're all praying for that. And let's hope. And one thing what I noticed is these globalists or the leftists, they fear the nationalism, because any nationalism, they think that it's a setback for them. Even George Soros, I remember him telling that in India nationalism is speaking up. So I mean they're trying to equate it to the 1940s or something, 1930s, but it's not true. It's the other way around. In fact, these are the globalists are the ones who are evil, who are trying to meddle with the rest of the civilization, rest of the world. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. We'll talk about that later on. And let me conclude it. So I think the questions are hardly any questions today. On behalf of VHS Karnataka, I thank Shri K. Dasapathi Rao Garu for accepting our request and enlightening us on all of us distortions in Bharatiya Ithihasas. On this Samvada, thank you, Dasapathi Rao Garu. Thank you, sir, for coming and enlightening us. And
Thank you.
thank you, Nikhil Ji. Thank you, Tejas. Thank you, Sridhar. Unfortunately, Sudhindra, sorry, couldn't able to make it. Thank you, our technical team, Shri Ishwaraya ji, Gadagi Rakesh. Last but not least, thank you all the wonderful viewers for making this Samvada success. Please stay safe and please do visit and register at vhsindia.org for further amazing online sessions of VHS Samvada. Thank you all. Jai Shri Ram.